Why the saber? Well, as you know, I had this idea to do all of the four major weapons of Kung Fu: the saber, the sword, the spear, and the staff. And I've done the staff and the spear, and this is the third book in the series. There's a number of reasons. One reason is because I just love the saber. I love it. It's a great weapon. It's fun to do. Another is because whenever we do a book, we try to point out the things that are essential to correct practice of Kung Fu. For instance, simple idea, body turning, torso movement. Well, that's true of empty hands, that's true of every single weapon, right? On the other hand, it's not the same with everything. For instance, one reason you might turn with your empty hands is just to generate power. Well, that's true of the saber too, but another reason with the saber is to siphon off the power so you can reverse the action much more rapidly. Well, that's not in empty hands very often. So, universal principle, turning the body, turning the torso, application different. Then there are things that just apply to that particular thing. For instance, spinning. Well, Kung Fu has spinning all through it, but really the spinning that counts the most is with the saber. Because due to the nature of its construction and its typical usage on the battlefield, spinning was absolutely mandatory for a saber skill. So you have that, it's fun, and you have the fact that it illustrates universal principles, but in a unique way. Oh, the saber we picked is the Shaolin Pigua saber, which you almost can't get any better. Pigua is a style famous for its saber work because of its arm work. They work together perfectly. And therefore, what we're doing with all of these books is we're not just saying here's a form, even though this is a good one. It could be some other form. But we're trying to list the real attributes of the saber. I mean, my problem is I see so much of this stuff, and when it gets to usage, for instance, it's something that a 10-year-old could have figured out. That can't be the effect of 2,000 years of practice. There has to be a little bit more to it, and there is. Every single weapon has specialties of usage that are surprising how logical they are and how good they are, and you never see taught. Let me take the staff for an example. When you see people practice two-person staff sets, they spend all the time clacking at each other. There's a Chinese saying, 1,000 pieces of gold for one clack. Clack is considered to show that you're an amateur, that you're doing it wrong. Saber's the same way, right? Every style just about has saber motion, but when you watch the forms, you barely see anything happening. You just go like this, and it's like they don't know what they're doing, which is what happens. They don't know what they're doing. So the forms are important, but the basics are the treasure in these books. And that's what we're emphasizing. We're going to do all four weapons because they're so essential. As far as the four basic weapons, I get a lot of questions as to what order they should be learned in. If, for instance, you have a choice, every school is different. Basically, there are two families of weapons, the longs and the shorts, like the Steins and the Metzes, okay? And the longs are the staff and the spear. Shorts are the saber and the straight sword. So the simple rule is one of each and safe. The safest way to start a long weapon is the staff, needless to say. As far as the short weapons, saber is safer than straight sword. Right, you're probably not going to get injured either way, but that's the way you start because it only has one side bladed. Okay, then you go to spear, and then you go to straight sword. Okay, so it's staff, saber, spear, straight sword. Generally considered the best way to learn them. Now, the saber has great characteristics of its own. For one thing, doing it is fun. And it's not only fun, but it's fast, it's lively, it's powerful, it's fierce. It has to be. If you compare it to the straight sword, you have two very different ideas. The saber, even though it's a, quote, yin, it's represented by the tiger, okay, and that's a, quote, yin animal, which waits in the cave and then leaps. Saber is very much like this. When it moves through space, it has to disappear here and appear over there. The reason for that, in part, is because the saber, being a battlefield weapon, always met its nemesis, the spear, whenever there were altercations. And what would happen is you have to get inside the spear. And to get inside the spear, you have to take a chance. You may have to roll, you may have to spin, you may have to leap, you may have to grab the spear and pull yourself in. all sorts of stuff. But straight sword has over the centuries become more of a personal combat weapon. The problem with straight sword is it can't block anything, right? If, for instance, someone were coming with a heavy staff, it would just go right through the straight sword. So what straight sword does is it moves out of the way and cuts. So we call it intercepting, jia. So you cut the other person that come in. So this, where we consider the saber to be the tiger leaping, we consider the straight sword to be the phoenix gliding and traversing and always moving kind of sideways out and around. And that's a good idea about those two weapons. That's what their essence is. I get a lot of questions from people who love Kung Fu or are studying it, but don't quite understand what's the relation of weapons. I mean, they'll say things like, well, I don't generally carry a spear, which obviously, I think I have an answer in part, but you have to understand that when I talk about Kung Fu, I'm talking about a martial art. By that, I don't mean personal combat. I don't mean sparring. I don't mean self-defense. I mean martial, as in war. As I said, not personal combat. Therefore, when you think about war, you would see that, for instance, a broadsword is far more practical than a short stick. The saber to the short stick is something like this. The idea is very specialized to Kung Fu, but we consider short weapons to be very easily converted. For instance, when you know saber, you are going to be able to wield short stick pretty easily. And iron fan, and flute, and double short sticks, double fans, butterfly knives. All these things grow out of an expertise. Because if you're very good at, say, saber, and you're good with your hands, short stick falls kind of in between difficulty-wise. So in a sense, if you know saber, you know short stick. The only difference is it's easier. You don't have to worry about the blade. You just hit any surface you want. And short weapons become just natural. You just pick one up and you know what to do with it, right? If you have some grounding. However, that also generalizes to even more sophisticated weapons. For instance, the Miao Dao, which we know as the Japanese sword, the Ken, was originally a Chinese war weapon, longer than the present-day samurai sword, but again, based upon the saber. The horse knife, which is a two-handed saber, is based upon the saber. The Da Dao, the Guan Dao, the so-called spring and autumn big knives, all these are based upon the same basic weapon. That's why the first four weapons are so essential. They are the building blocks of all other combinations. So we think of saber as a short weapon, but not a shorter weapon. The shorter weapons, such as sticks and all that, are considered to be just a subdivision of saber. So when you learn saber, the first reason to learn is you're learning 5 other weapons. The second reason to learn it is that the movements of these weapons have, over the centuries, been highly refined to show Kung Fu principles. So if you never, ever, ever used a saber, even for practice, it wouldn't matter. What would matter is something shaped something like this. Having a blade, having a flat side and all that allows you to learn things about power generation and all that. For instance, real simple. When it's against the body, most people would come out and cut, all right? Now, we don't like to cock in Kung Fu. We don't come back to hit you. And yet, in this particular case of a saber, as you can see it, the best way to shoot at you is to pull and push at the same time to get it going, and then to let it go outward. So what you have is a weapon, not a weapon, but a technique, where you do the opposite of the normal and get a better result. Well, that's like a Kung Fu principle. That happens a lot of times. So-called yin techniques, where you go one way, actually have tremendous power. So the saber teaches, for instance, the control of planes. Okay? Straight sword teaches the control of angles and poking. Each of the 4 weapons has a lot of specialties and a lot of energies which can only be gained through the study of that weapon.